The snow came down hard that evening, the kind that doesn't announce itself gently. It fell in thick, punishing sheets, blurring the streetlights into soft orange smears and turning the sidewalks into something dangerous and silent. The number 47 bus was already running 12 minutes late when it groaned to a stop at the corner of Maple and Fifth, its doors hissing open to swallow the small crowd that had been stamping their feet in the cold. Sarah Williams was the last to board. She stepped up carefully, her white cane tapping twice against the rubber floor mat, her left hand gripping the steel rail with the kind of practiced confidence that comes not from ease but from years of learning to move through a world that rarely made room for her. Her violin case was strapped to her back. It was old, worn at the corners, and painted near the latch with a tiny blue butterfly, faded now, but still there. Still hers. She reached into her coat pocket for her transit pass. It wasn't there. She tried the other pocket, then the small zipper pouch inside her bag, then the coat pocket again, fingers moving faster now, her breathing tightening just slightly. "Ma'am," the driver's voice was flat, tired, "you boarding or not?" "I'm sorry, I have it, I just need a second." "Lady, there are people behind you." "I know, I'm sorry, just... we don't have all night." Someone behind her exhaled loudly. Someone else muttered something she didn't catch but understood perfectly. The bus was warm inside and smelled of damp coats and impatience, and Sarah could feel every single person on it deciding, in real time, that she was the problem. "I have a monthly pass," she said, keeping her voice steady. "I use this route every week. I must have dropped it when I..." "Do you have it or don't you?" "I don't have it right now, but I can." "Then I need you to step aside." "Please," she said quietly. "It's snowing, I just need to get home." A woman near the front said loudly, "Can we just go? Some of us have places to be." "Seriously," a man's voice added, "this happens every time." Sarah didn't know that man. He didn't know her. But he said it like he did, like she was a recurring inconvenience in his specific life. And something about that particular cruelty, so casual, so clean, made her throat tighten. The driver stood up. He was a broad man, and when he stood, the gesture alone was enough to communicate what came next. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to exit the vehicle." Please, it's below freezing out there." "I understand that, but I can't let you ride without payment. Those are the rules." "I pay every single week. I have a pass. I just don't have it with me right now." "Ma'am." "I'm blind," she said, and she hated saying it the way she hated needing to use it, like a bargaining chip, like a last resort, like proof of something she shouldn't have to prove. "I'm blind and it's snowing and I just need to get home." Nobody said anything. Not one person on that bus offered to pay her fare. Not one person stood up. The silence was the loudest thing in the room. She stepped back off the bus. The doors closed behind her. She stood on the sidewalk and listened to the bus pull away, its engine growling as it disappeared into the white dark. And for a long moment she just stood there with the snow landing on her face and her hand tight around the handle of her cane and her violin on her back and nowhere to go. She started walking. She didn't know exactly where she was going. She knew the route home well enough, 12 minutes on foot in good weather, longer now, slower now, but she walked because standing still felt worse. The snow packed under her feet. The wind cut through her coat. She kept her cane moving in front of her, steady, mechanical, the way she always did, the way she had taught herself to do years ago when the world stopped waiting for her to catch up. She didn't cry. She had learned long ago that crying in the cold just made everything colder. 2 blocks away, Daniel Hart's black SUV was idling at a red light. He wasn't watching the road. He was reading something on his phone, a briefing, a proposal, something urgent and forgettable, while his driver, Marcus, drummed his fingers on the wheel. Daniel was 38 years old and had been described in at least a dozen magazine profiles as decisive, brilliant, and private. He was the kind of man who moved through the world with quiet authority, who didn't raise his voice because he never needed to. He had built a technology company from a rented office into something worth billions, and he wore that success like a well-fitted suit, present, but not showy. He looked up. He saw the bus pulling away. And then he saw her. A woman standing alone at the bus stop in the snow, a white cane in her hand, a violin case on her back. She was very still for a moment, and then she started walking slowly, her head slightly down against the wind. Something about it stopped him cold. "Marcus," he said. "I see her," Marcus said quietly. "Pull over." Daniel was out of the car before Marcus had fully stopped it, his phone already forgotten on the seat. He walked toward her quickly, his shoes cutting through the snow, and when he got close enough he said, gently but clearly, "Excuse me." She stopped, turned slightly toward his voice. "I saw what happened," he said, "on the bus." Her expression was carefully neutral. "I'm fine." "You're not," he said, not unkindly, just honestly. "You're standing in a snowstorm." He was already shrugging off his coat. "Please don't," she said immediately. "It's not charity," he said, and placed it gently around her shoulders. "It's just a coat." She opened her mouth to say something and closed it again. He looked at the violin case. He saw the butterfly. And the world shifted. His face did something complicated, a flicker of recognition, then confusion, then something deeper and older than either of those, and when he spoke again, his voice was quieter than before. "I'm sorry," he said slowly. "Where did you get that violin?" If this story already has you feeling something, you're exactly where you're supposed to be. Hit that asterisk subscribe button right now. Stories like this one drop every week, and you do not want to miss what happens next. Now keep reading. You won't regret it. Sarah turned toward his voice with that particular stillness that sighted people often mistook for blankness, but was actually attention, deep, precise attention. The kind she had developed over years of reading the world through sound and texture and the weight of words. "Why do you ask?" she said carefully. He hesitated. "May I see it?" She didn't hand it over. She didn't know this man. But something in his voice, not the wealth in it, not the authority, but something raw and unsteady that didn't belong to either, made her pause. "It was a gift," she said, "a long time ago." "From whom?" "A woman named Eleanor," she said it simply, the way you say the name of someone you loved and lost. "Eleanor Hart." Daniel went completely still. The snow kept falling. A car passed. Somewhere down the block, a sign creaked in the wind. Everything else in the world continued normally, and Daniel Hart stood in the middle of it and felt the ground tilt beneath him. "Come inside," he said. His voice had changed. The authority was still there, but something else had joined it, urgency, something almost desperate. "Please, there's a cafe on this block. Let me buy you something warm. I have to ask you something." She should have said no. She almost did. But the cold was real, and her fingers were going numb around her cane, and there was something about this man's voice that she couldn't quite dismiss, something that didn't feel like danger. "5 minutes," she said. The cafe was warm and amber-lit, the kind of small neighborhood place that stays alive through winters like these because people need somewhere to go when the cold gets personal. Daniel guided her to a corner table, not taking her arm without asking first. She noticed, just describing the path, letting her follow, and they sat across from each other with 2 cups of tea between them. "What's your name?" he asked. "Sarah Williams." He closed his eyes. When he opened them, he looked like a man who had just received news he'd been afraid of for years without knowing it. "Sarah," he said slowly, "my name is Daniel Hart. Eleanor was my mother." The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of 25 years of questions, of letters that stopped coming, of a child who used to fall asleep wondering what she had done wrong. Sarah's hands tightened around her cup. She never told me she had a son, Sarah said softly. She was private about her family life, Daniel said. She kept things separate. She always said he stopped. His jaw worked. She always said that doing good quietly was better than doing it loudly. She used to read to me, Sarah said. Her voice was almost wondering, like she was uncovering something she had buried to protect herself. Every Tuesday, she'd come to the hospital and she'd sit beside my bed and read. Poetry mostly. Sometimes stories. She had this voice that made you feel like nothing bad could happen while you were listening to it. Daniel said nothing. His eyes were bright. She gave me the violin on my 9th birthday. I didn't know how to play yet. She said that didn't matter. She said the violin already knew how and it would teach me if I let it. Sarah almost smiled. I thought that was the most ridiculous thing I'd ever heard. That sounds exactly like her, Daniel said, and his voice broke very slightly on the last word. She disappeared, Sarah said. The almost smile was gone. One Tuesday she just didn't come. Then the week after, the letters stopped. I was 9 years old and I thought she stopped herself, pressed her lips together. I thought I had done something wrong. You didn't, Daniel said immediately. Whatever happened, that wasn't it. I know that now. It took me a long time to know it, but I know it. She tilted her head slightly. Do you know why she stopped coming? No, he said, and it was the truth. He didn't know. He was beginning to understand in the way you begin to understand a story you've been inside of without realizing it, that there was something wrong, something missing, that the shape of what had happened was not the same as the shape of what he'd been told. His mother had died 11 years ago. She had been generous and beloved, and she had left behind a legacy that Daniel had spent years trying to live up to. She had also, he now understood, left behind something unfinished. Did she ever, he stopped, chose his words carefully. Did she ever make any financial arrangements for you, any sort of fund or support? Sarah blinked. No, why would she? Because, Daniel said slowly, that's what she did. She didn't just visit. She built long-term support for the children she cared about. She set up trusts, education funds. It was all done privately through the family's legal office. He watched Sarah's face carefully. You're telling me you never received anything? No disbursements, no communications from a lawyer? Nothing, Sarah said. After she stopped coming, there was nothing. I aged out of the hospital system, lost my parents a few years apart, and nothing. She said it plainly, without self-pity, the way someone describes a fact they have long since absorbed into the ordinary texture of their life. I've been on my own since I was 19. Daniel looked at this woman across the table, her careful posture, her worn coat, the calluses on her fingertips from years of playing, the quiet dignity she carried like it cost her something to maintain it, and something cold moved through him. I think, he said carefully, that something went wrong, and I think I need to find out what. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then, Mr. Hart, I'm not looking for anything from you. I know that, he said. This isn't about me giving you something. This is about something that was already yours. He started the next morning. Daniel was not a man who did things slowly when he believed they mattered. And this, he was certain by the time he got home that night, mattered in a way that very few things in his life had. He called his head of legal affairs at 7 in the morning and had his assistant pull every file from his mother's philanthropic records by 8. He cleared his entire afternoon schedule, which caused exactly the kind of controlled panic in his office that his team had learned not to voice out loud. And he sat down in the archive room of the Hart Foundation offices, and he began to read. Eleanor Hart had been meticulous. Every child she helped had a file. Every trust she established was documented in triplicate. She had names, dates, correspondence, follow-up notes, all of it preserved in her careful handwriting, the looping script that Daniel remembered from birthday cards and grocery lists, and the margins of books she was reading. He found Sarah's file in the third box. The label read, Sarah WILLIAMS Trust, established 1999. His hands weren't entirely steady when he opened it. The documents inside were thorough. His mother had established a trust valued at just over $400,000, structured to release funds in stages. A portion for medical treatment, a portion for education, a portion for living expenses through adulthood. She had written a personal note in the margin of the initial filing that said simply, in her handwriting, "She will do extraordinary things. Make sure nothing gets in the way." He turned the page. At the bottom of the release schedule, there was a stamp. Funds disbursed 2001. Daniel stared at it. The trust had been released. The money had gone somewhere, but Sarah Williams had received nothing. He had looked at her last night, her worn coat, her careful economy of movement, the way she had counted out exact change for her tea, and he knew, with the kind of certainty that doesn't require proof but goes looking for it anyway, that she had not received $400,000. He called his forensic accounting firm at noon. By the following Thursday, he had the preliminary report on his desk. The money had been transferred through a series of intermediary accounts. 2 of them registered to shell companies. 1 of them registered in a name that meant nothing until Daniel cross-referenced it against his mother's old billing records. Victor Langford. Victor had been the Hart family's primary legal advisor for over 30 years. He had drafted wills, managed trusts, handled estate planning, and attended every major family milestone with the quiet, essential presence of someone who knew where every body was buried, legally speaking. He was 70 now, retired to a house in Connecticut that Daniel had always thought was larger than a lawyer's retirement should reasonably afford. He was beginning to understand why. He called Sarah. She picked up on the 3rd ring, and he could hear traffic behind her. She was walking somewhere, always walking, always moving through the city with that cane and that violin, and that particular kind of endurance that he was finding increasingly difficult to look at directly. "I found the trust," he said without preamble. A pause. "What trust?" "My mother established a trust fund for you in 1999. $400,000. It was supposed to cover your medical treatment, your education, your living expenses." The silence on the other end was very long. "Sarah, that's not possible," she said quietly. "I have the documents in front of me." Another silence. When she spoke again, her voice was controlled in the way that voices get controlled when the alternative is falling apart in public. "If it existed, I would have known." "You should have," he said. "The records show it was disbursed, but not to you." He heard her stop walking. "Someone stole it," she said. It wasn't a question. Her voice had gone very flat and very still. "I believe so. I have accountants investigating, but the trail is pointing somewhere specific." "Who?" "I'm not going to say that yet, not until I'm certain." A pause. "I'm sorry, Sarah. I'm so sorry you're only hearing this now." "Don't apologize," she said, not sharply, just firmly. "Find out what happened." He did. It took 3 more weeks, but by the end of it the picture was complete and ugly and entirely unambiguous. Victor Langford had redirected the funds within 18 months of Alina establishing the trust, before Sarah would have been old enough or connected enough to notice their absence. He had used the shell companies to obscure the trail, but the forensic accountants were very good, and the evidence, when assembled, was overwhelming. Daniel arranged to meet him at a neutral location, a conference room in a downtown law firm. No theatrics, just 2 men and a table and the truth. Victor was older than Daniel remembered, his hair fully white now, but his posture was still the careful posture of a man who had spent decades managing what others knew. He looked at the documents Daniel placed in front of him with the measured expression of someone deciding which version of events might still save them. "I want to hear you say it," Daniel said. Victor's expression shifted. Something that might have been shame passed through it and was replaced by something harder. I managed that trust appropriately under the— Don't, Daniel said. His voice was quiet. I have the transfers, I have the accounts, I have everything. He leaned forward slightly. I want to hear you say what you did. She was a child, Victor said finally. A blind child with no family and no connections. The money would have been— It would have been hers, Daniel said. That's all it needed to be. I made judgment calls over 30 years of service to your family. You stole from a 9-year-old girl, Daniel said. That is what you did. There is no other version of it. Victor looked down at his hands. Daniel stood up. My lawyers will be in contact, he said. And Victor, I want you to know something. My mother trusted you. She trusted you specifically because she believed you would protect the people she couldn't protect herself. He picked up the file. I hope that has been heavy to carry. He left. He wasn't done. Back at his own office, Daniel sat at his desk with a glass of water he wasn't drinking and thought about his mother, about who she was, about what she had built, about the gap between the woman he had known and the woman Sarah had known, and how those two versions of a leaner heart, seen together, made her somehow larger and more complete than either alone. His assistant knocked. Mr. Hart, the archive team found something else in your mother's personal items, a sealed package. It was in the back of a storage unit that wasn't included in the original estate inventory. She set it on his desk. It was a padded envelope, sealed with tape that had yellowed with age. On the front, in his mother's handwriting, were 2 words. For Daniel. That revelation deserves a pause. If you haven't liked this story yet, do it now. And if you're not subscribed, fix that immediately. There is still something in that package that will completely change everything you think you understand about this story. Keep going. He didn't open it that night. He brought it home and set it on the kitchen table and looked at it across the room for a long time. The way you look at something you know is going to cost you something to open. He made dinner. He ate without tasting it. He sat on the couch and looked at the package some more. He opened it just after 11. Inside were 3 things. A stack of photographs, bound with a rubber band that snapped when he touched it. A bundle of handwritten letters, each one carefully folded and placed in its own small envelope. And a VHS tape in a plastic case, labeled in his mother's handwriting. Watch this last. He looked at the photographs first. They were all of Sarah. Not a version of Sarah he recognized. These were photographs of a child, 8 or 9 years old, small and serious-faced, sitting up in a hospital bed with a violin across her lap. In one photo, she was laughing at something out of frame. In another, she was asleep, the violin still tucked against her side like she'd refused to put it down. In almost every photo, somewhere at the edge of the frame or leaning close was a leaner. His mother looked happier in those photographs than in almost any other photograph Daniel had of her. He read the letters next. They were written to him, to a future him, a him that didn't exist yet when she wrote them. She had started writing them when he was in college, she said, because she had things she wanted to tell him that she wasn't sure she knew how to say out loud. The letters were about her life, her choices, her beliefs, about what it meant to love someone you had no obligation to love, about Sarah. I met her when she was 8, one letter read. She had just received her diagnosis and she was sitting alone in a room with a window, and when I walked in she tilted her head toward me and said, very politely, "You walk like you're worried about something." I asked her how she could tell. She said, "Worried people are always in a hurry to get somewhere but slow down at the last second, like they're not sure they want to arrive." I thought about that for weeks afterward. She was 8 years old. Daniel read every letter. By the last one, he understood something about his mother that he had not known before, not because she had been hiding it, but because some things don't fit into ordinary conversation, don't survive the translation into casual speech, and need to be written down in careful sentences to retain their shape. She had loved Sarah the way you love someone who teaches you something about yourself that you couldn't have learned any other way. Then he set up the old VHS player he'd had in storage for years, and he watched the tape. His mother appeared on screen. She was younger than his last memory of her, maybe early 50s, her hair still mostly dark, her eyes exactly as he remembered them. She was sitting in what looked like her study, the bookshelves behind her familiar and unchanged. She looked directly at the camera with the composed, deliberate expression of someone who had rehearsed what they wanted to say and then decided to say something different. "Daniel," she said, "if you're watching this, then you found Sarah. I'm glad. I was worried you might not." He pressed his hand over his mouth. "I want to tell you something that might surprise you," she continued. "People always assumed I helped her, that she was my project, my cause, my good deed. I let them think that because it was easier than explaining the truth." She paused. "The truth is that she helped me." He hadn't expected that. "When I met Sarah, I had everything I was supposed to want, and I was not sure any of it meant anything. She was 9 years old and she had just lost her sight, and she was, Daniel, she was so hopeful. Not falsely hopeful, not the performed optimism of someone who's afraid of their own grief. Just genuinely, stubbornly convinced that her life was going to be worth living." His mother smiled. "I used to drive home from the hospital and sit in the car for 10 minutes before going inside. Because she made me want to be better than I was when I woke up that morning, every single week." He was crying by now, steadily and quietly, the way adults cry when something old finally gets permission to surface. "I don't know what happened between when I recorded this and when you're watching it," Alina continued. "But I know I set up the trust, and I know I told Victor to manage it. And if Sarah never received it, and Daniel, please find out, please check, because something never felt right about how he handled her file." She leaned toward the camera. "Fix it. Whatever it is, fix it. Not for me. For her." She sat back. She used to say that the violin already knew how to play and would teach her if she let it. A small smile. She turned out to be right about that too. A pause. "Make sure she knows she never left my mind. Not one day." The tape ended. The screen went to static, and Daniel sat in the blue-gray light of it for a long time, not moving. The photograph spread on the cushion beside him and the letters in a pile on the coffee table, and his mother's voice still present in the room the way voices stay present after the sound has stopped. Then he picked up his phone and called Sarah. She answered on the first ring, which meant she hadn't been asleep either. "I watched the tape," he said. A pause. "There was a tape. She left me a message about you." His voice was rough at the edges. "She said you never left her mind, not one day." The silence that followed was the kind that meant someone was holding themselves very carefully together. "She also said," Daniel continued, "that you helped her, not the other way around." "That's not..." Sarah started again. "That's not true." She was very specific about it. Another long silence. "She would have said that," Sarah said finally, and her voice was thin and precise, the way voices get when they're carrying something large. "She always gave away the credit." "Maybe," Daniel said, "or maybe she was telling the truth." He let that sit. "Then I want to set up the academy in her name, a music academy specifically for children with visual impairments. Real resources, real faculty, permanent, and I want you to lead it, not as a figurehead, as director." "Daniel, you are exactly who should run it," he said. "Not because of what happened to you, because of who you became in spite of it." The pause this time was different, softer. "Let me think about it," she said. "That's all I'm asking. Don't go anywhere. We are right at the finish line, and what happens next is the reason this story was worth telling. Subscribe if you haven't already, and leave a comment below telling me, did you see this ending coming?" She said yes. It took her 4 days, and when she called him back, her voice had the particular quality of someone who has made a decision they know is right and are still quietly terrified of it, which is usually the sign that it matters. The Alina Hart Music Academy opened 13 months later, on a Thursday morning in October. The kind of clear, cold day that smells like wood smoke and possibility. The building was warm and bright inside soundproofed practice rooms, a small recital hall, a library full of materials in braille and audio format, and it was full, on opening day, of children. Blind children, partially sighted children, children who had been told in various ways by various people that music was not going to be the thing for them. Sarah stood at the front of the recital hall with the butterfly violin in her hands, and she looked not out at the room in the way sighted people look, but toward it, turned into it, present in it the way she was always present in a room, and she said, "I want to tell you something that someone once told me. She said the violin already knows how to play. It will teach you if you let it." She paused. She was right. She was right about a lot of things. Daniel was in the front row. He watched Sarah settle the violin beneath her chin, watched her draw the bow, and listened as the first note rose into the room and expanded to fill every corner of it, clear and warm and completely sure of itself. The way certain sounds are sure of themselves. The way truth is sure of itself when it finally gets to speak. The children in the room went very still. When she finished, there was a moment of complete quiet before the applause. And in that moment a small girl, 7 years old, her eyes clouded, her hands folded carefully in her lap, stood up from her seat and walked to the front with the careful, deliberate steps of someone who has learned to trust her feet. She held out her hands. Sarah crouched down to her level. "What's your name?" "Amara," the girl said. "What do you want, Amara?" "I want to play like that," she said. Simple, certain. The same certainty Sarah had once carried into a hospital room and given away without knowing it, and which had come back to her now, years later, multiplied. Sarah placed the violin gently in the girl's hands. "Then we'll start today," she said. And on the back of the violin, where Amara's small fingers rested against the wood, was a freshly painted butterfly, still wet, still blue. Sarah smiled. "Someone once believed in me," she said softly, "so completely and so quietly that I didn't fully understand it until I was standing here." She guided the bow to the strings. "Now it's my turn to believe in you." If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Like the video, leave a comment with the one word that describes how this made you feel, and subscribe, because every week there is another story here that deserves to be told. Thank you for staying until the end. It always matters that you do.